right, so this is the number 8 album. Number 8, fellas, in the
of all time.
No, not of all time. No, it's pretty good though. I mean,
Yeah.
eight in the '60s. The Rubber Soul was 2 in 1965 and 26 overall.
Oh,
so this is up there. It is the Beatles' 6th studio album, and it was mostly recorded over a period of about a month from October through November of 1965. And it was released on December 3rd, 1965. There was a lot of pressure coming at the band at this time to release that record prior to Christmas, and they followed through. So, but because of that, there was they did have some trouble trying to crank out songs, oddly enough, because this album is chock full of gems. This is a fantastic record, and they were kind of under the gun to write some songs for this, and this is still what they came out with, so that's all the more impressive. It's the second Beatles album that consists of all originals. You remember the first one?
Hard Day's Night.
You got it. Yep. So it's the first. It's also the first recording in their careers where they didn't really have any other obligations. So they were not touring at this time. They were not filming any movies. They were not doing any radio, promos or any commitments or anything like that. They basically just had to focus on the studio work, and they really decided that this was going to be this is the first, I guess you could say, true artistic statement that they were trying to make. They were getting a little sick of the touring and the screaming fans. They were getting exhausted from all of the Beatlemania stuff, and they really wanted to kind of start to abandon the singles format, although they were doing singles still at this time. I mean, while they were recording this album, which actually had no singles that were released from this record, they did record Day Tripper and We Can Work It Out, which were double A-sides. So those were the songs that were coming out as singles at that time. But they were really starting to get inspired by, Dylan, the Byrds. They really liked the stuff that the Byrds were doing, and so they wanted to do more exploring in the studio. They wanted to specifically start to create songs that either would be impossible or really difficult to play live, and this is kind of what they came up with. So this record is kind of a mixture. It's known as a mixture of pop, soul, and folk songs that were inspired a lot by some of the Motown and Stax artists that they were listening to in the States while they were out on tour. And Lennon referred to it as the Pot album, and Harrison called it his favorite personal Beatles album. So the album title was taken from the colloquialism plastic soul, which was apparently a term that a black blues artist used to describe the Rolling Stones, the blues that they were playing, because they're white dudes. They're white dudes playing soul, right? And so McCartney had used that term as well to describe them, and then they just kind of changed it a little bit to rubber soul. And I like this. This quote from Ringo in a 1966 press conference? Ringo. He said that they called the album Rubber Soul to acknowledge that in comparison to American soul artists, quote, "we are white and haven't got what they've got." And he added that this was true of the other British artists who were trying to attempt this music as well. So it's kind of the Beatles. It's an homage to soul music, but it's also done with a little bit tongue in cheek, knowing that hey, we're also we're kind of being posers here at the same time. But this album also demonstrates the Beatles, their increasing, maturity as songwriters and lyricists. They were really trying to focus on incorporating brighter guitar tones, new instrumentations, specifically the sitar, fuzz bass, the harmonium, and they were striving for more expressive sounds, and different types of arrangements in their music. And so they would continue with this process throughout their next couple, specifically with their next two albums, Revolver and Sgt. Pepper. There was some, starting some slight, what am I trying to say? There were some notes of disharmony within the band, I guess you could say, because they were starting to have more disagreements in the studio. The recording engineer Norman Smith stated that the studio sessions were starting to show conflict, that there was a clash between John and Paul, which was becoming more obvious. And he also wrote, as far as Paul was concerned, George could do no right.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, so there was starting a little bit at this time as well. but it was very
Matt,
highly...
how long before we have our Beatles creative tension on the Coming to Stacks podcast?
We're still early, man. We're still like, we're in the With the CTS podcast right now. I think, that won't, we have several more,
decades.
years to go. Yeah. It'll come, John. Don't worry. But this was highly influential on their other peers, leading to a widespread focus away from the single format, looking at albums as works of art, as cohesive, pieces. And the recording took place after the band's tour of America, which included their legendary performance at Shea Stadium, which was in August of 1965. They had already met Dylan, but later in the year they would meet Elvis. And they also had their cartoon, the Beatles Saturday morning cartoon, began airing at this time as well.
Oh, interesting.
Yep. That used to be on Nickelodeon, I think, or maybe VH1 or something. They used to air the old Beatles cartoons. They're probably out there on YouTube or something somewhere.
How many episodes of that are
there?
there?
I don't know how many episodes. I think it was on air for like 2 years, something like that.
I'm gonna look it up.
There you go. Do it. Ringo's nose is really big in the cartoon. That's the only thing I really remember. Like, damn, that guy's got a huge schnoz. So before the recording session, McCartney was giving a new bass guitar, and this was another Rickenbacker 4001, which produced a fuller sound than the hollow body Hofner bass that he was using. But it allowed for greater melodic precision, and you'll notice there was it's a very melodic album. Obviously, it's the Beatles, but Paul's bass was a little different. You're getting a little bit more of George's Rickenbacker as well. He's kind of going back to it, which you're getting some of that jangle pop. And the album cover was kind of done. It's a little bit stretched out. It's kind of an accident, really. They had the album the picture taken. The photographer had set up a lot of the different slides kind of on these cardboard like cutouts that they were kind of leaning up against. One of them fell backwards and kind of like leaned into a light, which elongated the picture. And the Beatles thought that was great. They were like, "Can you do that? Can you make it stretch out a little bit and look all trippy?" And they were of course smoking lots of weed, so that's why it's a little bit stretched out like that. But so this is Rubber Soul. This is the beginning of the Beatles really, taking it to the next level. Taking it, stuff that they did with Help, but really kind of bringing it to, to that more artistic, if you will, level. And it became, very influential to many artists. Brian Wilson, famously said that he went out and started, after hearing this record, he went out and started writing Pet Sounds, and that's kind of, and then Pet Sounds then in turn inspired Sgt. Pepper. So they were, a lot of that competition was there, but it was also really pushing other artists to do more. Shortly after, this is, several months later, the Rolling Stones released Aftermath, and that was their first real, kind of, as we talked about before, the first Jagger, fully
Original.
Full original album. Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. And John Cale said that Rubber Soul was an inspiration as he and Lou Reed developed their band, the Velvet Underground. So you have Rubber Soul to thank for White Light, White Heat. Another thing that the Beatles might have had a hand in. It sounds nothing like them, but yeah. So and I think we'll just leave it at that right now. So let's start with our reactions to this record. Josh, we'll start with you. What do you think of Rubber Soul? Did you were pretty familiar with this going into this week, correct?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It was like a warm blanket. The Beatles have done it again, folks. They put out a great record.
Shocker.
What a surprise. I love this album. I forgot how amazing this album is now number 2 behind Hard Day's Night on my favorite Beatles albums. I think Hard Day's Night is slightly stronger for me, because I think some of these songs, like Matt said, there's so many good songs on this album. Why not, split them up or make 2 albums or something? But and some of them are weaker, a little weaker for me than in Hard Day's Night. But I love the experimentation that they're doing at this point. I hear that on this album. I picked up on that sitar, especially Norwegian Wood, which is one of my favorite Beatles songs. I heard that fuzz bass too. I think it's on I Think for Yourself, maybe.
Yes.
Yep. I heard that, and even something like just the French lyrics in Michelle is a little bit different than what they're used to be doing. I've always liked that song.
Josh,
as well.
do you remember who that song was inspired by? Or John?
It's not Nico, is it?
No.
Wasn't
That was a good guess, though.
Eric, wasn't it George Harrison's soon-to-be wife?
No, there's Patty Boyd influence on here, but no, Michelle, if you remember, talking back Miles Davis was inspired by Juliette Greco, the French bohemian
Yes.
lifestyle. So yeah,
Is My Michelle
right.
a tribute to this song?
John
From
Lennon was
Guns
a
N'
fan. I
Roses.
forgot. Yeah.
yeah, Juliette Greco and Nico had some serious Kavorka going on.
Yeah. And it's just, again, it's one great song after another. I think Girl is a bit weak for me. That's kind of one of the weaker songs, although I like Lennon's first, verse or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, In My Life is an all-timer. I love how sad and melancholy that is, and the piano is like the cherry on top in that song for me. And then even small things like at the end of during Run for Your Life, where they put the emphasis on the D and end. That's the end, little girl.
Mm-hmm.
I've always liked that, the way they sing that, and it's just so perfect. I mean, to be fair, I don't really think of this as a soul album. I think of it more as a pop album. I don't see the soul aspects necessarily, but they're just writing really well at this point. Despite the fact that there may be tension or not getting along, they're writing good songs. I still don't understand where all this pressure is coming from for them to keep producing so quickly. I mean, they are like the number one band in the world. Can't they like push back a little and say, no, we need a break or something?
Well, that would come in 1970, Josh.
Yeah, I think part of it was it was what bands did. I mean, all these every band was putting out multiple records a year. They were certainly selling as much or more than anybody, and the record company wanted to keep making money, and then this is just what they were pushed to do. So it was just more of a cultural thing, I think, but they were so good at it that they might have felt more pressure. And yeah, like, let's get it out by Christmas. You got a month and a half. Let's do it. Boom.
Yeah,
go.
It's crazy. Oh, I love the cowbell too on Drive My Car. I always love a good cowbell song, and the percussion in general. They always use good instrumentation with like tambourines and things like that. I feel like they put them in great places. That just adds to the catchiness of their songs.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, if you haven't heard this album in a while, please listen to it. It's breezy. It's great. I can't recommend it enough.
Awesome. All right, John.
So I'm going to do this as sort of some musings as opposed to like a formal review here. The first thing
Deep
I want
thoughts.
to say is this is the second time where I've been impressed by the Beatles churning out two remarkably fully formed albums in the same year. I think a couple weeks ago we talked about how Magical Mystery Tour and Sgt. Pepper came out the same year, Sgt. Pepper's, and this was the same year as Help. And it's just remarkable that they released those two albums, as well as I like how Matt just randomly threw in. Well,
Singles.
they were going to throw in like Day Tripper and like some other, but they just ended up being sort of singles they released. So those were also in the Rubicon, so to speak, of the Beatles in 1965. So I mean the prolific nature of the Beatles' songwriting and the quality of their songwriting is, there's a lot of reasons why the Beatles are a wonderful band and an influential band, a great band, but that's, right up at the top that they can just churn out this many songs. I think what struck me in listening to this time is it is definitely the Beatles taking a step up in terms of their instrumentation. I know that it's often heralded as they're writing more complex songs, and they are, but they're not quite at where they would be at like Revolver and Sgt. Pepper either. And there's some strength to that as well, because they go pretty esoteric at that time. And for every great song, there's also, a song that, they're just throwing out word salad and stuff like that along the way. This is still primarily love songs, which the Beatles write fantastic love songs, but the instrumentation does take a step up. With that being said, I knew it, but I was surprised how much this album sounded like Help, and was almost like the equivalent of a double album with Help, whereas Help is a little bit more poppy and singles driven, whereas this is a little bit more of the deeper cut. Matt, I'm going to kind of give you a little bit of a excitement right here. It's kind of like Use Your Illusion 1 and Use Your Illusion 2, in that, one of them had most of the singles on it, and then the other one kind of had the deeper cuts, the fan appreciation cuts along the way. And that's kind of how I saw Help and Rubber Soul are always paired for me in some ways. Not just because they were recorded in the same year, but because I think they come from the same spirit of the Beatles transitioning from early Beatles into a more full-formed band. And that journey continues with Revolver, and we'll get there down the road. But yeah, there's wonderful songs spread from the beginning of this album to the end. Literally from song 1, Drive My Car, to song 14, Run for Your Life, which are both excellent songs that bookend the album. Other standouts for those that haven't heard it, In My Life has been talked about. It's a wonderful song. You Won't See Me, What Goes On are two songs that I really like, that I guess would classify as deeper cuts for the Beatles. Wait as well is a song that I really do like. And I hadn't mentioned Norwegian Wood either, which is close to as famous a song as there is on this album. But yeah, just once again, the Beatles at this stage, just they never overstay their welcome. It's just, if you look at it in Spotify, it's just a series of the number 2 with a certain amount of seconds after it for every single track on this album. And in an era where everybody else is sometimes putting on at least one track that just seems like it sort of overstayed its welcome, it's just nice to have somebody committed to churning out enjoyable pop songs that still are profound and are complex in 2 minutes and 49 seconds. And that's kind of an underrated skill, being complex in a tight time frame. It's much easier to be complex when you're sprawling it out over 8 minutes, right? It's almost like, look at me, I'm complex. But to do it in the frame of a song that also can get radio play is a remarkable accomplishment. Josh talked about a lot of the instrumentation that's in here. The fuzz bass always stands out to me on this album. But the other thing that stands out to me, and I know Matt way back when talked about how I think it was Harrison actually played the Rickenbacker before the Byrds did, right?
Yep. You started with Hard Day's Night was the big Rickenbacker, Yeah,
and album. I mean, this is the album where the jangle, becomes a part of the Beatles sound quite a bit. And I always hear, I mean, it was present a little bit before that, but this is where it shows up enough that it's like, oh, okay, that's maybe not a signature sound, but it's a sound that they pull out more often than not. And so I really particularly enjoy when George Harrison puts that into tracks, as well as when it's coupled off of Paul's very underrated bass skills. And the last thing I'll say is that in many ways, I think this is Matt, this is going to be maybe a hot take, but I don't know. I think this is the Beatles' best harmony album. The harmonies on this album
they do have a lot of good
lush,
harmonies.
and in every single song, well, maybe except for the Ringo song, where it feels like Ringo's just doing his thing and the rest of them are kind of just, you almost feel like just in the background, they're kind of looking out the window or having a smoke and just sort of half playing while Ringo's doing his song. But man, he is so enthusiastic that, it's there. But on the rest of the songs, they're a tight musical enterprise all the way down to their harmonies, which sound fantastic. And I think how good a harmony band the Beatles are can often be lost, especially if you're a person that only looks at the Beatles as their later output and forgets the early and middle output, which really the harmonies are what stand out and I think really establish them, along with their songwriting chops. So strong approval. I mean, I've long said, and I'm willing to revisit this as we go through Beatles albums, I've long said that Help and Rubber Soul are 2 of my 3 favorite Beatles albums. I'll leave the other one as a to be continued and revisited down the road, and maybe I'll change my mind as we listen to this, but I haven't so far. Help and Rubber Soul are still my favorite Beatles albums that we've listened to, as good as some of the other stuff is.
Awesome. So this is probably it's my favorite album that we've covered so far by the Beatles, by far. It is either my second, third, or fourth favorite Beatles album. I haven't decided. I'm leaning towards 2, though, to be honest. I will save what the other 2 will be. But as I think,
so you think this, by far, Matt, huh?
For me,
the ones we've covered.
Yeah, I think so. I look. I really love Help. I really love Hard Day's Night. But I can eat. When I say that, I mostly mean it's a very easy call for me to make. I don't think it's close. I love Help, and I see what you're saying, John, about it kind of being the 1A and this being the 1B. I don't know if I have to think more about your Use Your Illusion analogy, because I think that there were good singles, big singles on both of those, but I don't even know we'll discuss that because we're not talking about those albums.
Oh, we're going to have to do a bonus episode then.
Oh, God, they're so good. But
that's a seminal album for the three of us.
Yeah. But John, when I say that, I don't mean that as a slight as those for those other records. It's just that this just stands out as like those are kind of middle high range, and this is like in the top echelon, I would say, for me. I pretty much agree with everything that you're saying. But I have to disagree with Josh. I don't think there's any weak songs on here. I think that I guess I understand why you might not like Girl. It's a little bit of a different sound. Maybe the inhaling, which some people thought was him inhaling drugs. I could see how that might be a little annoying or whatever. But I think that the song construction here is fantastic. I agree with you what you're saying, John. I don't know. That's a good question. What's their best harmony album? But there's certainly some great stuff going on here, and they're really starting to pave the way for what they're going to do later on, and which will culminate in some ridiculously sounding, like overproduced stuff that we covered in the last album, Magical Mystery Tour, and with all the crazy stuff that they were doing here. And it's kind of interesting to say that this is really like 2 years removed from that, really, essentially, So, but you've got stuff like the sitar on Norwegian Wood. That's the first time that they're using that inspires the Stones to do it. It was actually David Crosby from the Byrds that encouraged George to check out Ravi Shankar, because it wasn't just the use of. Remember, we talked when we did Help, and in the recording of the movie, that's where there was a sitar in one of the scenes, and that's where George first saw one or heard one, really. And it was a combination of that and his, hanging out with David Crosby that encouraged him to check out Ravi Shankar.
So he played the sitar on that song.
George Harrison did. Yeah, he was the sitar guy, and you're going to see that come out, especially with the next two albums. He plays on Revolver. It's on. It's pretty much exclusively on a track on his track on Sgt. Pepper. But that's like that starts raga, rock, stuff like that. I read a fact that like Nowhere Man. We haven't even talked. I mean, that's the harmony song. That is the Beatle harmony song. It was actually one of only 2 songs on this record that they tried to perform live, and there are recordings of this. If you could see clips of them trying to sing, it sounds terrible because they can't hear each other because everybody's screaming, and so they can't get these intricate harmony parts. But when they can record it like they do here. It's so good. It really makes that song, and that's a song that Lennon wrote. It's one of the songs that he wrote when after spending hours and hours trying to write a song, being forced to write a song, and he comes up with this right under pressure, which is just which is phenomenal. I think you got some really good Harrison songs. I think this is where George starts to establish himself as a solid songwriter, particularly with. What is it? If I Needed Someone. That's the real jangle guitar. That was him. John, he actually took that riff on If I Needed Someone directly from a Bird song called Bells of Rhymney, which I think was on the is on the Mr. Tambourine Man album, which we didn't cover. But if you listen to it, it's very similar. He influenced the Byrds, and they influenced Harrison right back. But I think If I Needed Someone is Harrison's. It's considered Harrison's strongest song up until this point, and it's hard to argue with that. It's a great song, and I also find it interesting when you talk about In My Life. I always thought that was a straight up Lennon song, like flat out, but there's some discrepancy of whether McCartney always said that Lennon wrote the lyrics and he wrote the music. But then there was this stat on Wikipedia that I thought was nuts. It says apparently there was a study that was done in 2018 at Harvard University. They used something called bag of words modeling that conducted by artificial intelligence that reported that there was a 0.18% probability of McCartney writing the song, a 81.1% chance that Lennon wrote the song, and a 43.6% certainty that McCartney wrote the bridge. So I'm like, you have algorithms now that can kind of like
figuring
you
it
put
out.
into a computer that will tell you the percentage possibility that somebody wrote a song. But I had to put that in there because I thought that just sounded ridiculous, and I've never heard of anything like that before. But apparently McCartney had a big hand in writing the melody or some parts of the music to that, and that's one of Lennon's favorite songs. It's one of the first ones that he called it his first real true piece of work. Because it was so personal. And I disagree with Lennon because he hated Run for Your Life, the last track on it. He said it was, he thought it was overly misogynistic. He said he dismissed it as, he said it was his least favorite Beatles song. It's the song he most regrets writing. It also got slammed, I think, critically, but I don't know, man. I think that chorus is great when they hit the catch you with another man. Like the harmony in that, I love that part. Melodically, I'm not even listening to lyrics. The melodies like hooks me right in. I love this record. What Goes On? You talked about that, John. That's kind of like that country Ringo, song that he's got going on.
That's the other one that I kind of don't like that much. As much as the other songs,
it's the only song in the Beatles catalog that's credited to McCartney, Lennon, and Starkey for writing credits because Ringo said he wrote about 5 words and I haven't done a thing since. Was his quote about that. But that was actually a song that Lennon had written when he was with the Quarrymen. So that was a song that they had. They were actually thinking about releasing that after Please Please Me or something like in the early days, but they just never did. And this was actually seen as a song, it's almost like a filler when they were trying to come up with songs to put on the record. But I really like it. It's got that country twang. Ringo sings it perfectly. It's not the strongest harmony, but there's still harmony in there. And when they do the chorus, I actually find myself singing the harmony part here. So I know I'm going a little long here, but I love this record. I think this is them really hitting it on all cylinders, and taking it to a little bit different level. Not hugely. They're not hugely going out yet. I think that really starts with the next record. But this is a really fun record to listen to. Never gets old. I think when I first got this, I was like in sophomore or junior in high school. And I was always familiar with all the singles. And like I said, there was no real singles that came off of this. So when I first got this, it was just like one unknown, amazing track after another that I loved right away. So this also kind of holds a special place for me because it was really at the beginning when I really started getting into them. And it was a real nice surprise and kind of opened my eyes to how great they were. So I can't say enough good things about it.
Nice. Sounds like positive all around. I have a little bit on the Beatles TV show. There were 39 episodes. Each episode was named after a Beatles song. It aired on Saturday mornings, and then it was rebroadcast on MTV in 86 and 87, and Disney Channel in 89. So maybe you saw it then when it was rebroadcast.
Yeah.
But it looks really fun and silly.
Can we buy it somewhere, Josh, or stream it somewhere?
Oh, good
Might
question.
be cleaning the stack.
Yeah, I'll look that up later.
By the way, you remember Saturday morning cartoons? Do you remember when that was a thing?
Oh yeah, I was all
John?
in.
Yes, I do, Matt. I do remember when. I think Saturday morning cartoons are still a thing, just in a different way.
Yeah,
they're not
just,
really.
They're all-day all-day cartoons. I remember actually years ago, I was down at my brother's house, and I was gonna watch. I was like, "Oh, it's Saturday morning. Nieces, nephews, let's go watch Saturday morning cartoons." And my sister-in-law was like, "Matt, there's cartoons on all the freaking time. There's no such thing as Saturday morning cartoons anymore." So. It makes me sad.
Yep.
Matt always has his member berries. Always
I do,
has
John.
His member berries.
I do.
Yep.
I do. But
okay.
Rubber
so
Soul.
now
Go listen to it.